Yeah, just analysing a couple of things ahead of these elections. Let's talk to the Eastern Cape. Eastern Cape, always a very big stronghold for the ANC. How do you think they're going to perform in this election? I mean, we've got a party like the ATM, and that's an interesting party with interesting dynamics within the Eastern Cape as well. Talk to us about the ANC and performance and other parties in the province.
Yeah, I think that the interesting thing is that the three biggest provinces would be Gauteng, KZN, and the Eastern Cape. So the Eastern Cape is a very important factor in the garnering of support for any political party. But as you're saying, Leon, that traditionally it has been an ANC stronghold, but there have been a number of dynamics, with the emergence of parties like the ATM. But I would still expect that the ANC will win in the Eastern Cape, despite the emergence of parties like the ATM, largely because of the whole thing of tradition, of affinity to the brand, affinity to the history, etc. I don't think that the emergence of the ATM, of a party like the ATM, will reverse that. I mean, if you look at the performance of a party like the UDM, which has been in the innings for a long time in the Eastern Cape, they have not been able to dislodge, despite the popularity of someone like Bantu Holomisa, etc. They have not been able to dislodge the ANC. So I think that the strength of the ANC brand, despite the problems that the ANC has had, I mean, if you look at a city like a town like Mthatha, Goa, a lot of those places are run down places, run by the ANC, but that I don't think is going to detract. On voting day, when people are in that polling booth, highly unlikely that people would then decide to vote for something like the ATM, which has just been set up.
Yeah, I mean, when you look, however, back to the municipal elections in the Eastern Cape, there was a big disappointment having, the Nelson Mandela Bay municipality taken from the ANC. That was a massive blow to them. It really was. I mean, when you saw the DA coming up there, forming alliances and coalitions, and obviously it's still very volatile there, but do you think there's going to be a shift? I mean, that was a vote perhaps against the ANC and the things that they were doing wrong at the time, and you've got somebody like Cyril Ramaphosa, the president, now trying to make all the right moves, say all the right things to try and win those lost votes back.
I think that with regards to a place like Nelson Mandela, the biggest problem there for the ANC has been the ANC itself, rather than what the opposition has done. The opposition is just coming up and picking up the scraps. But if you look at the history of what has been happening with the ANC in the Eastern Cape, but in particular in Nelson Mandela Bay, there was a lot of internal fights, etc., which have not quite been resolved yet. So I think that has been the problem. The other problem has been the problem of service delivery. That's why I'm saying that the ANC has been its own enemy. In fighting within the party and the failure to deliver on the services that residents require.
Quite interesting. We were talking to service delivery protests, and I mean, we went to Alex. We spoke about the Eastern Cape. Limpopo is another very big one. We saw Vuwani Giani. We saw those erupting yesterday, and many different organizations calling for a boycott of the election. Suddenly there's been a little bit of an about turn last night with both of them saying, no, go to the polls, we're not going to disrupt them again. But it seems that service delivery, as is always the case with elections, these protests are getting louder and louder and bigger. How does this affect the election? I mean, does it affect how a person votes?
I would not say so, Eliane. I think that maybe when we look at the service delivery issues, which we should in relation to the election, I think what is happening is that they are a consequence, they are a symptom of the distancing of the political system from ordinary people in South Africa, and a lot of it has got to do with weak representation or lack of accountability of public representatives, because for those of us who remember going back to the early years, a lot of the leaders who have been elected and are now sitting in the legislatures and they are sitting in parliament, etc., would have been the leaders in the communities providing leadership and accounting to the communities. But what tends to happen is that many of these leaders, as soon as they get elected and their lives get better, together, they move out of the villages, they move out of the townships, so that there is no clear link between the elected representatives and the people who voted for them. So I think that the service delivery protests are actually a symptom of that there are cracks in the system that probably need to be addressed. So people, instead of associating the election with their ability to choose and to decide their future, they associate it with the failure of the system. So they use the election to indicate that the system itself is not working.
Yeah, as we know that in these elections we are going to have two different ballots, one for the provincial, one for the national. A lot of the times people speak to that split vote. So you'll see voting for one national and then changing your vote completely and voting in the provincial. What are your views on that? Do you think that's how people think and vote and think, okay, well, for service delivery, I'm going to vote for this particular party, but, my heart is still with this party, so I'm going to go with them.
Oh, yes, you will have that. And I think the other thing also, Lian, is that we have to accept that South African politics are still very much racially stratified. And there's a historical factor there that kicks in, the idea, for example, if you're going to vote nationally, I don't know how many black South Africans would be comfortable voting for a white president or a colored president, right, at a national level, and vice versa. I don't know how many white people or white voters would choose the ANC over the DA. So that that kind of thing. So I think that those undercurrents still influence our politics. Hopefully, over time, that will change. But that is still very much ingrained. So people will then tend to say, look, I recognize that where the DA, for example, has been running things have been running smoothly, they've been running efficiently. So for the local thing, for service delivery, I'm quite happy to give them so that then, they can fix their roads, fix the traffic lights, make sure that that there's water coming out of the taps, etc. But when people come to choosing a president for the country, then the old historical tendencies tend to come back. But I think it's part of the evolution, of our country.
Interesting, very, very interesting.
Even someone like you remember there was that furore recently when Ace Makashule said that people shouldn't vote for Umlungu. So those things are still there. Those sentiments are still there.
Still play
but
on
it means what it does mean is that our politicians need to probably be more responsible in how they address those issues, because at the end of the day, the election is today's issue, but we also need to think about the country going forward, for future generations, to say what kind of South Africa do we want?
Indeed.
Do we want our politics to continue to be politically racially stratified like that, or do we want to build one country and one nation?
All right, Mike, thanks very much. We'll continue to chat to Mike and get his ideas ahead of these elections and the polls opening in 28 minutes from now. We're going to take a break. We'll continue to crisscross around the country and find out how your province is doing ahead of today's poll. Stay tuned.